Dr. Elijah Williams had been working at the hospital for over 10 years. Known for his calm demeanor, remarkable skill, and ability to handle high-pressure situations, he was a trusted surgeon. His colleagues respected him, and the patients who came under his care often left with a deep sense of gratitude. Dr. Williams had earned his place in the world of medicine, not just because of his expertise, but because of his unwavering dedication to his patients, no matter their background. One particularly busy morning, the ER doors burst open, and a team of paramedics wheeled in an unconscious woman on a stretcher. She had been in a serious car accident. Blood was dripping from her forehead, and her pulse was weak. A nurse quickly shouted for Dr. Williams. "Dr. Williams, we need you in Trauma 1 now," the nurse called out. Without hesitation, Dr. Williams jogged down the hallway, his white coat flapping behind him. As he entered the trauma room, he took a deep breath and surveyed the situation. The woman on the table appeared to be in her late 40s, her face bruised and swollen. Her vital signs were unstable, and the team had already started administering fluids. Dr. Williams quickly went to work, giving the team instructions. He could feel the pressure building, but he had seen worse. He focused on the task at hand. This was a life-and-death situation, and the color of his skin didn't matter. He had a job to do. The woman's name, he learned, was Deborah Mitchell, a well-known member of the community. Her name had come up in several news articles due to her vocal opposition to diversity programs. Deborah was known for making public statements about how she felt about racial issues, often speaking about her negative views on people from different backgrounds. She had even made her feelings known about the hospital, once criticizing the number of minority doctors in the city's medical field. But none of that mattered to Dr. Williams. In that moment, all that mattered was saving her life. He had taken an oath to care for people, to help them no matter who they were or what they believed. He would save her, and that would be the end of it. "Let's prep for surgery," he instructed his team, his voice steady and firm. He had seen enough to know that Deborah's injuries were critical. There was no time for second thoughts or emotions. Her life was in his hands. As they moved her to the operating table, Dr. Williams couldn't help but think of the kind of person Deborah was. He had read her file briefly while the team was preparing. Her history of outspoken views on race and culture had been noted by her doctors in past appointments. There were reports that she had even argued with hospital staff about the treatment of certain patients, making derogatory comments about the backgrounds of other doctors and nurses. It was clear that Deborah held deep-seated prejudices. He could only wonder how someone so determined to push away others could end up in a place where she was now so vulnerable. But as a doctor, it wasn't his place to judge. His responsibility was to her care, and that was what he would focus on. "Let's get to work," he muttered to himself, more to center his thoughts than anything else. He glanced up at his team. "We've got a life to save." The surgery took hours, the delicate work requiring constant attention. Dr. Williams worked tirelessly, his hands steady even as exhaustion began to set in. Every moment was critical. There were times when it seemed like Deborah's condition might worsen, but the team fought with everything they had. Dr. Williams stayed focused, his mind sharp, his hands sure. Every procedure, every incision, every stitch was made with precision and care. By the time the surgery was complete, Dr. Williams was exhausted. He could feel the tension in his shoulders, the deep ache in his body from hours of standing. But it was over. Deborah had made it through. Her heart was beating strong again, her breathing steady. "We've done it," he said to the team, wiping the sweat from his brow. "She's stable for now. Let's move her to ICU for observation." The next few hours were a blur as the medical team transferred Deborah to a recovery room. Dr. Williams made his rounds, checking in on patients, reviewing charts, and consulting with other doctors. But in the back of his mind, his thoughts kept drifting back to Deborah. What would it be like when she woke up? Would she even remember the surgery? Would she even acknowledge the fact that he had saved her life? Dr. Williams wasn't naive. He knew how people like Deborah could think. Her beliefs were deeply ingrained, and people didn't change overnight. He wondered if she would feel the same sense of entitlement, the same arrogance once she realized it was a black man who had saved her. But he pushed those thoughts aside. There was no use in dwelling on it. His job was done. He had done what he was trained to do. He had saved her life. Whatever she thought of him after that didn't matter. Later that night, as Dr. Williams left the hospital to go home, he reflected on the events of the day. It was a typical day in the life of a surgeon, one filled with challenges, decisions, and lives hanging in the balance. But as he climbed into his car, he found himself wondering about Deborah's recovery. How would she react when she woke up and realized who had been responsible for saving her? He didn't know the answer to that question, but he did know one thing. No matter what she said or did, he had done his job. That was all that mattered. The hours that followed Deborah's surgery passed slowly. In the sterile, quiet ICU room, the steady beep of the heart monitor and the soft hum of medical machines filled the air. Deborah was still unconscious, her body recovering from the trauma it had endured. Dr. Williams kept an eye on her progress, making sure she remained stable. The team had done their best, but the next few days would be crucial. As Dr. Williams walked into the ICU, he couldn't help but glance at Deborah's chart. She had been transferred to the ICU for close monitoring, but the signs were good. Her vital signs were strong, and there was hope that her body would heal from the damage. Yet Dr. Williams knew all too well how quickly things could take a turn for the worse. He had seen patients wake up only to have complications arise moments later. The shift change was approaching, and he needed to speak with the nurse in charge. He entered the small room where the nurses gathered and found them discussing the patients. Dr. Williams, one of the nurses, greeted him. "Deborah Mitchell's recovery has been steady, but we're keeping a close eye on her. It's too soon to say if there will be any long-term effects, but her condition is stable for now." "Good," he replied, nodding. "Just keep monitoring her. Let me know if there are any changes, especially regarding her neurological responses. I want to be the first to know if she wakes up." The nurse nodded, a knowing look in her eyes. She had worked with Dr. Williams long enough to understand that he always took a personal interest in his patients, no matter their background. As the day went on, Dr. Williams attended to his other responsibilities. The hospital was busy, and there were always new patients to care for, but his mind kept returning to Deborah. He had saved her life, but the reality of her racism loomed in the back of his mind. Would she even acknowledge that? Would she be grateful, or would her prejudice blind her to the truth? It was late in the evening when Dr. Williams was finally able to take a moment for himself. He sat in the break room, sipping on a cup of coffee, his mind racing with thoughts of the day. It wasn't uncommon for a doctor to deal with difficult patients, but something about Deborah's case felt different. There was a nagging feeling in his gut, a question that he couldn't quite shake. What would happen when she woke up? Would she remember him? Would she thank him for saving her life? Or would she recoil? Disgusted by the idea of a black man helping her, he couldn't help but wonder if, despite the fact that he had saved her, she would see him only for the color of his skin. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. He checked the message. It was from one of the nurses. "Deborah is waking up. She's alert but a bit disoriented. You might want to come by." Dr. Williams stood up immediately, his heart rate quickening. He hadn't expected her to wake up so soon. As he made his way to the ICU, he couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation mixed with anxiety. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. He entered the room quietly, careful not to disturb her. Deborah was still groggy, her eyes fluttering open as she slowly began to regain consciousness. Her face was pale, and the bruises from the accident were still visible, but her breathing had steadied. She looked around the room, confused, as if trying to figure out where she was. "Ms. Mitchell," Dr. Williams said softly, approaching her bedside. "I'm Dr. Williams. You're in the hospital. You were in an accident, but you're going to be okay." Deborah blinked a few times, her eyes focusing on him as her mind processed the information. She tried to speak, but her voice was weak. I don't remember what happened." "That's normal," Dr. Williams reassured her. "You've been unconscious for a while, but you're stable now. We did everything we could to help you." Deborah's eyes narrowed slightly as she looked at him, as if something wasn't quite right. She didn't recognize the doctor at first, but as she studied him, a flicker of recognition crossed her face. The name Dr. Williams seemed to ring a bell, and then it hit her. He was black. Her mind reeled and a sense of unease washed over her. The feelings she had pushed down for so long began to rise to the surface. She couldn't believe it. The man who had saved her life was black. He struggled to process the reality of the situation. She had always believed deep down that people like him didn't belong in places of authority, especially not in medicine. She had heard all her life that black people were inferior, that they didn't have the same abilities as white people, and yet, here he was standing in front of her claiming to have saved her life. Deborah felt a rush of anger and disbelief. It wasn't something she could easily shake off. Her emotions were complicated. She was grateful to be alive, but the reality of who had saved her filled her with resentment. Her upbringing, her entire worldview, had just been turned upside down. Dr. Williams noticed the hesitation in her eyes, the tension in her face. He could see the change in her demeanor as the minutes passed. She wasn't saying anything, but he could tell something was wrong. He had seen it before, patients who were uncomfortable with their doctors because of their race. But he had never expected to encounter it in a situation like this where his sole purpose had been to save her life. He waited for her to speak, unsure of how to address the discomfort that hung in the air. Finally, Deborah's voice broke the silence. "Why? Why did you help me?" she asked, her words laced with confusion and anger. Dr. Williams frowned. "Because it's my job. I took an oath to care for all my patients, no matter who they are or where they come from." Deborah's eyes flickered with disbelief. "But you're black. How could someone like you save my life?" The words stung even though Dr. Williams had expected them. He took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "I'm a doctor, Ms. Mitchell. My race doesn't change my ability to do my job. I saved you because that's what I do, save lives." Deborah looked away, her eyes filled with frustration. She couldn't reconcile the man who had saved her with the views she had held for so long. The conflict inside her was overwhelming. Dr. Williams stood silently, giving her space to process. There was nothing more to say for now. All he could do was wait. He had done his part, and now it was up to her to decide how she would handle the truth that had been forced upon her. As the room filled with a heavy silence, Dr. Williams quietly stepped back, knowing that this was just the beginning of a long journey. The woman lying in the bed was in the midst of a battle, not just for her physical recovery, but for something much deeper, and whether she realized it or not, her healing process had only just begun. The days passed in a blur for Deborah. She was still recovering from the accident, her body sore, her mind foggy. Every now and then she would wake up, and each time she saw Dr. Williams standing there, the reality of the situation would hit her all over again. He had saved her life. A black man had saved her life. It didn't matter how many times she tried to push it aside. She couldn't ignore the truth. Deborah couldn't understand it. She had always believed that people like him weren't capable of doing what he had done. The anger she felt every time she saw him only grew. How could she possibly thank him, or even acknowledge him when everything she had been taught for years told her that someone like him wasn't worthy of this kind of position? She would lie in her hospital bed staring out the window, lost in thought. Every time Dr. Williams entered the room, she would force herself to look away, pretending to be absorbed in something else. But deep down, the frustration was eating away at her. Dr. Williams, for his part, remained as professional as ever. He checked on her regularly, making sure her vitals were stable, adjusting medications when needed, and keeping an eye on her recovery. He never mentioned the uncomfortable encounter from a few days ago, but Deborah could see the quiet strength in his eyes. He wasn't going to give up on her no matter what she thought of him, and that made it worse. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to hold on to her beliefs, to cling to the idea that people like him couldn't possibly be trusted. But the more she saw him, the more she realized that he was doing exactly what he was supposed to do. Care for her. Save her. It wasn't personal for him. It was just his job. One morning as she lay in bed, a familiar figure entered her room. It was Dr. Williams. His usual calm and steady demeanor was in place as he checked her chart and made a few notes on the clipboard. "How are we feeling today?" he asked, his voice kind but firm. Deborah stiffened. She couldn't look at him directly. It felt like something was breaking inside her, like she was slowly losing the battle to hold on to everything she had believed. "Fine," she replied curtly, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a brief silence between them, and Dr. Williams, sensing the tension, didn't push her. Instead, he asked, "Are you in pain? We can adjust the medication if needed." "I'm fine," she said again, her tone cold. He nodded and made a few more notes, clearly not surprised by her response. Deborah could tell he wasn't taking it personally. He wasn't offended by her behavior. He was simply doing his job, keeping her well-being his priority. But despite his calm approach, Deborah could feel her anger rising. She wanted to lash out, but she didn't know what to say. What could she say to him? She could accuse him of being everything she thought he was. She could remind him of her beliefs, call him out for the very thing that he had done, save her life. But the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply closed her eyes and turned her head away. She didn't want to face him anymore. She didn't want to confront the reality that everything she had known and believed was slowly falling apart. For the next few days, Deborah became more withdrawn. She wasn't as cooperative with the staff as she had been before the surgery. She would avoid making eye contact with Dr. Williams and keep to herself as much as possible. Whenever he entered the room, she would stare at the wall or pretend to sleep. The other nurses and doctors noticed the shift in her behavior. Some tried to comfort her, but others were beginning to grow frustrated. It wasn't unusual for patients to go through mood swings after a traumatic event. But this was different. Deborah's actions weren't just a result of the trauma. They were a direct reaction to the man who had saved her life. They all knew that. One afternoon, as Dr. Williams entered the room to check on her, he was met with an unexpected sight. Deborah was sitting up in bed, her hands tightly gripping the sides of the mattress. Her eyes were red and her expression was tense. She looked like she was about to say something, but he couldn't tell what. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, his voice measured and calm. "How are you feeling?" Deborah didn't answer right away. She took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling as she seemed to struggle with the words. Finally, she looked up at him, her face filled with frustration. "You know, I don't understand why you're doing this," she said, her voice shaky but firm. "Doing what?" Dr. Williams asked, genuinely curious. She paused for a moment, clearly trying to gather her thoughts. "Why are you helping me?" she asked again. "Why would you, someone like you, go out of your way to save someone like me?" Dr. Williams didn't flinch. He had prepared himself for this moment, but that didn't make it any easier. "Because that's what I do," he replied simply. "I'm a doctor. My job is to save lives." Deborah's eyes flashed with anger. "But you don't understand," she said, her voice rising. "I don't want your help. I never asked for it. You're the last person I'd want to owe my life to. I don't need anything from you." Her words stung, but Dr. Williams refused to show it. He knew she was angry, and he understood why. It was hard to accept help from someone you had been taught to believe was inferior. It wasn't something that could change overnight. But he also knew that this was her battle, not his. "I'm not asking for anything from you, Ms. Mitchell," he said, his tone even. "I'm simply doing my job. I don't expect anything in return. I don't care about your beliefs or your opinions. My job is to save your life, and that's what I've done." Deborah looked away, her jaw clenched. She was furious, but she couldn't deny the truth in his words. She had to admit on some level that he was right. He had saved her. He had done exactly what he was supposed to do. And now here she was, struggling to accept it. For a long moment, there was silence between them. The only sound was the soft hum of the machines around her. Deborah wanted to say more, to argue, to hold on to her anger, but she couldn't. She didn't know how to fight this battle. The man who had saved her life was standing in front of her, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't erase that truth. Dr. Williams gave her one last look before turning to leave. "If you need anything, I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere." And with that, he left the room. Deborah sat there, her thoughts a whirlwind. She didn't know how to process it all. The anger, the resentment, the confusion, it was all consuming. But deep down, she knew something had shifted. She didn't know what it meant yet, but she knew it was going to change her. How, she didn't know, but it would. The days following their last confrontation were some of the hardest for Deborah. Each time Dr. Williams entered her room, she felt a mix of emotions she couldn't quite control. Anger, confusion, and a sense of helplessness all fought for attention within her. She found herself replaying their conversation over and over in her mind. Every word he had said echoed in her thoughts, but they only seemed to make her more furious. She had never felt so cornered in her life. She had grown up in a world that told her people like Dr. Williams were less than her, that they didn't deserve the same opportunities, the same respect. It was hard to admit, but that belief had been drilled into her since childhood. Now, faced with the reality of his kindness and skill, Deborah didn't know how to process the truth. A black man had saved her life, and she couldn't ignore the resentment she felt because of it. But the more she tried to hold on to that anger, the more it seemed to unravel. Deborah would lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She had been forced to face a painful truth. Her beliefs, the ones that had been so deeply ingrained in her, were wrong. She had to admit that despite everything she had been taught, Dr. Williams had done something that no one could take away. He had saved her. Yet every time she thought she might be able to let go of her hatred, the old, stubborn part of her would rise up again, reminding her of what she had always believed. The conflicting feelings inside her were becoming unbearable. One evening, Dr. Williams entered her room as usual. He seemed as calm and professional as ever, but Deborah could sense something different in the way he looked at her. It wasn't pity or anger. It was something else entirely. Maybe it was understanding. But she wasn't sure. "Ms. Mitchell," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence. "How are you feeling today?" Deborah didn't look at him at first. She kept her eyes fixed on the window, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. But when she didn't respond, Dr. Williams didn't leave. He simply stood there, giving her the space to speak if she was ready. Finally, Deborah spoke, her voice low. "Why are you still here?" Dr. Williams was silent for a moment. She could hear the faint hum of the machines around her, the sounds of the hospital in the distance. He could easily have brushed off her question, gone through the motions of his usual checkup and left the room. But he didn't. He stood his ground, waiting for her to finish. "I don't get it," she continued, her voice shaking. "I've been rude to you. I've been a terrible person. And yet you keep coming back. Why?" Dr. Williams didn't seem surprised by her words. In fact, his calm demeanor remained unchanged as he sat down in the chair beside her bed. "You're in pain, Ms. Mitchell," he said quietly. "You're recovering. I'm here because that's my job, to make sure you get better. And it's not about anything other than that." Deborah's brow furrowed. "But I'm not just physically hurt. I'm a mess inside. You don't understand. How can you?" Dr. Williams sat back slightly in his chair, his gaze steady. "I understand more than you think," he said. "We all carry things with us, things we've been taught or things we've come to believe. But I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to help you get better. Mentally, physically, emotionally, however long it takes." Deborah looked away, fighting back the tears that threatened to rise. She had never felt so vulnerable in her life. "I don't know how to deal with this," she admitted, her voice small. "I don't know how to let go of everything I've believed." "You don't have to let go of it all at once," Dr. Williams said gently. "But you do have to face it. And that's the hardest part, acknowledging the things that have shaped you and deciding if they're still true." For the first time, Deborah really looked at him. She saw the compassion in his eyes, the patience in his voice. She had expected him to be angry, to feel resentful, but instead he was offering her something she hadn't expected: understanding. A part of her felt guilty for the things she had said and done. Another part of her still wanted to fight against the change that was quietly creeping into her heart. But Dr. Williams wasn't there to force anything on her. He was simply offering a way forward if she was willing to take it. "I don't know if I can change," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I've been this way for so long. I don't know how to stop." "You don't have to do it alone," Dr. Williams replied. "We all start somewhere. Change is hard, but it's possible. And it's worth it." Deborah stayed quiet for a long time after that. She didn't know how to respond. She didn't know if she was ready to face the truth, let alone let go of everything she had held on to for so long. But a small part of her, a tiny, almost imperceptible part, was beginning to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than the beliefs she had been raised with. Could she really change? Could she let go of the anger that had controlled her for so long? Dr. Williams didn't push her. He simply nodded, giving her the space to think. After a moment, he stood up to leave, but before he did, he looked at her one last time. "I'll be here if you need me," he said quietly. As he left the room, Deborah was left alone with her thoughts. The walls of the hospital room felt both confining and comforting. The room was quiet, and the machines hummed softly in the background, reminding her that she was still alive. Alive because of Dr. Williams. She didn't know what the future held. But one thing was clear: she couldn't keep running from the truth. Whether she liked it or not, Dr. Williams had forced her to face the very thing she had tried to ignore for so long. And it was terrifying. For the first time since the accident, Deborah felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The road ahead would be difficult, but she knew one thing for sure. She didn't have to walk it alone. Dr. Williams had shown her that. As she sat in her bed staring out the window at the fading light, she realized that maybe the first step to healing wasn't just physical. Maybe it was about confronting the parts of herself she had spent her whole life trying to suppress. It wasn't going to be easy, and she wasn't sure she was ready. But one thing had changed for sure. She was no longer angry. She was ready to listen, to learn, to change. As the days passed, Deborah's recovery progressed. The physical healing was relatively straightforward, but the emotional and mental weight of the situation lingered. She found herself lost in thought more often than not, reflecting on everything that had happened since the accident. Dr. Williams had continued to visit her regularly, but their conversations had become more meaningful, more open. Deborah wasn't used to this kind of connection. She had always prided herself on her independence, her ability to handle things on her own. But now, after everything, she found herself questioning that mindset. For the first time, she felt the urge to seek answers, not just from Dr. Williams, but from herself as well. It was early one morning when Dr. Williams came in for his usual checkup. Deborah was sitting up in bed staring out of the window, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The soft morning light filtered through the blinds, casting a gentle glow over the room. She heard the door open but didn't immediately turn to look. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell," Dr. Williams greeted her. Deborah nodded, though her mind was elsewhere. She wasn't sure how to start the conversation that had been brewing inside her. The anger from before was no longer there, but now there was something else, an overwhelming sense of confusion. She needed answers. She needed to understand why she had believed what she had believed for so long. Dr. Williams could sense the shift in her mood. He had always been observant, noticing the smallest changes in his patients. Today, Deborah seemed different, calmer but also more distant, as if she was grappling with something deep inside her. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, approaching her bedside. "I'm okay," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "Physically, I'm fine, but I don't know how to move forward." Dr. Williams sat down in the chair beside her bed. He had known this moment would come. The point when the walls Deborah had built around herself would start to crack, when she would begin to confront the reality of everything she had been taught and believed. "I think I've been avoiding something," Deborah continued, finally turning to look at him. "I've been avoiding the truth. About myself, about you, about everything." Dr. Williams stayed silent, giving her the space to express herself. "For so long I believed a lot of things. About people like you. About people who look like you. I don't even know where it came from. Maybe it was my parents, or the way I grew up, or the people around me, but I thought I knew the truth. I thought I understood the world the way things were supposed to be." She paused, her eyes searching for the right words. "And then you saved my life. A black man. And it completely shattered everything I thought I knew." There was no anger in her voice anymore, only a quiet, almost vulnerable confusion. Dr. Williams didn't interrupt, but his eyes softened. He had seen this before. It wasn't easy, but it was part of the process. Change, real change, never came without discomfort. "I didn't ask for you to save me," Deborah continued, the words coming slowly. "And I certainly didn't want to owe anything to you. But here I am, alive because of you." Dr. Williams nodded, listening intently. He knew the weight of those words. He could hear the struggle in her voice, the internal conflict that had been tearing her apart. And yet there was something else there too, a willingness to learn, to listen, to change. "I've spent my whole life thinking that I was better than people like you," Deborah admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know how to explain it, but I thought I was right. And now I don't know what to think. I feel like I've been living in a lie." Her words were raw, and Dr. Williams could hear the pain in them. It wasn't easy to confront one's own prejudices, but Deborah was doing it, and that was something worth acknowledging. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," Dr. Williams said gently. "This isn't something that's going to change overnight. It's a process, but you've already taken the first step by realizing that there's more to learn, more to understand." Deborah looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "But what if I can't change? What if I'm too far gone? What if I've done too much harm to people like you to ever make it right?" Dr. Williams shook his head, a quiet smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "It's not about being perfect. It's about being willing to grow, willing to learn. We all have our flaws, Deborah, But that doesn't mean we can't change. It doesn't mean we can't do better. Deborah sat back in her bed, her hands clasped tightly together. She had never considered that before. Her entire life she had been taught that people like Dr. Williams didn't deserve her respect. But here he was offering her something she hadn't expected, understanding. And it wasn't just understanding of her situation. It was understanding of the person she had been, the person she was becoming. I don't know if I can ever make up for the things I've said, the things I've believed, she said, her voice wavering slightly. But I want to try. I don't want to be the person I was anymore. I don't want to hate people for something they can't control. Dr. Williams leaned forward, his gaze focused on her. It's not about making up for the past, Deborah. It's about who you choose to be from this point forward. Every day is an opportunity to start again. For the first time in what felt like forever, Deborah felt a weight lift off her shoulders. It wasn't a complete transformation, not yet. She wasn't magically cured of the beliefs that had been ingrained in her for so long. But there was something different in the way she looked at the world now. Something that hadn't been there before. She felt a sense of responsibility, not just to herself, but to others. If she could change, if she could let go of the hatred that had once consumed her, then maybe there was hope for others too. Maybe, just maybe, the world could be a little bit better. I'm scared, Deborah said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. But I think I'm ready. I think I'm ready to start learning. Dr. Williams nodded, his expression kind. That's all anyone can ask for. As he stood up to leave, Deborah watched him with a sense of gratitude she had never thought possible. He had done more than save her life. He had opened her eyes to a new way of thinking, a new way of seeing the world. Thank you, she said softly. Dr. Williams smiled, a small, genuine smile. You're welcome, Deborah. And remember, it's okay to take your time. This is your journey. As he left the room, Deborah sat back in her bed looking out the window at the world beyond. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over everything. It felt like a new beginning. She wasn't sure where this path would take her, but for the first time in a long time she felt hopeful. Maybe the change would be slow. Maybe it would be hard, but she was ready to face it. She was ready to confront the truth about herself, about her beliefs, and about the people around her. And with that, Deborah made a promise to herself. She would learn, she would grow, and most importantly, she would never forget the man who had saved her life, not just as a doctor, but as a person who had shown her that the world was much more complicated than she had ever known and much more beautiful than she had ever imagined. Deborah's life after the accident was a mixture of quiet reflection and small steps toward change. Every day felt like a battle, but not in the way she had imagined. The real struggle wasn't about physical recovery. It wasn't about healing her body. It was about healing the wounds she had carried inside her for so long. Dr. Williams continued to visit her regularly. At first, the meetings were brief, focused on her physical progress, but soon they began to delve deeper. Deborah found herself opening up in ways she never thought possible, sharing her feelings, her fears, and the shame she had been carrying for so many years. One afternoon, a few weeks after the accident, Dr. Williams entered her room as usual. The weather outside was stormy, with dark clouds hanging low in the sky. Deborah sat by the window, gazing out, lost in thought. She hadn't been getting much sleep lately. Her mind was constantly in motion, going over everything she had been taught, everything she had believed, and everything she was trying to unlearn. Ms. Mitchell, Dr. Williams greeted her, his voice calm but warm. Deborah didn't immediately turn around. Instead, she simply nodded in acknowledgement. She wasn't sure what to say to him anymore. Part of her felt like she owed him an apology, but another part of her was still struggling to come to terms with the person she had been before. How are you doing today? Dr. Williams asked, approaching her bedside. Better, Deborah replied quietly. Physically, I feel fine. But it's everything else. Dr. Williams sat down in the chair across from her. Tell me about it. She looked at him then, her eyes searching his face, looking for some kind of reassurance. She didn't know what she was looking for exactly, but she knew that she needed to say what was on her mind. I don't know where to start, she said, her voice shaky. It feels like everything I thought I knew about the world is wrong. About people. About you. I don't know how to move forward. I don't know how to unthink everything I've believed. Dr. Williams sat quietly, his gaze steady but compassionate. He didn't rush her. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply waited, allowing her the space to express herself. It's like I've been living in a fog, seeing the world one way, and now, after everything that happened, the fog has cleared. And all of a sudden, I see things I never saw before. I see myself for who I really am, and it scares me. Her voice cracked at the end of her sentence, and she looked away, blinking back tears. Dr. Williams leaned forward slightly, his voice gentle. It's okay to be scared. Change is hard, but you're not doing it alone. You're taking the steps even if it doesn't feel like it's happening fast enough. Deborah took a deep breath, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She had never been someone who showed vulnerability. It had always been easier to hide behind her beliefs, behind the walls she had built. But now, with Dr. Williams, with the life he had saved, she felt the walls starting to come down. I've spent my whole life thinking I was better than people like you, Deborah said, her voice trembling with emotion. I don't even know how to say it without feeling ashamed. I was so blinded by my own ignorance, and now I don't know if I can ever make it right. Dr. Williams watched her, his expression never changing. He could see the pain in her eyes, the regret and the shame. But there was something else too, a flicker of hope, a flicker that had not been there before. You don't have to make everything right overnight, Deborah, he said softly. You can't change the past, but you can change how you move forward from this point. It's not about erasing everything you've done, but about choosing a different path now. She nodded, but the uncertainty still weighed heavily on her. But how do I make up for all the hurt I caused? How do I undo the years of prejudice, the years of believing that people like you weren't worthy of respect? Dr. Williams paused before answering. You don't undo it. You learn from it. You start by listening to others, by being open to understanding their experiences, and most importantly, you treat people with kindness and respect no matter who they are. That's how you begin to make it right. Deborah sat in silence, taking in his words. They weren't easy to hear, but they felt true. It wasn't about going back and fixing what she had done wrong. It was about moving forward in a way that was different, more authentic. I've been so focused on my own shame, my own guilt, Deborah said finally. I haven't even stopped to think about the people I've hurt, the way my actions and words affected them. I've been so wrapped up in my own anger and my own beliefs that I never took the time to truly understand the impact of what I said. Dr. Williams nodded. Understanding is a big part of it. It's easy to stay in a bubble, to be surrounded by people who think the same way you do. But real growth comes from stepping outside that bubble and hearing other perspectives. Deborah's mind raced. She thought about the people in her life, the ones she had treated unfairly, the ones she had judged. She thought about how her actions had contributed to the divisions in her community, to the ways in which she had perpetuated the stereotypes and prejudice she had been raised with. For the first time, she saw the full picture. She saw herself as part of a larger system, a system that had shaped her, that had influenced her decisions. But now she was starting to see that she could be part of changing that system. It wouldn't be easy and it wouldn't happen quickly, but it was possible. I don't know where to start, Deborah admitted, her voice quiet. I feel like I have so much to learn, so much to undo. It's overwhelming. Dr. Williams stood up, offering her a reassuring smile. You've already started. Just by being here, by opening up, you've already taken the first step. The next step is just as simple. Keep learning. Keep listening. And most importantly, be patient with yourself. Deborah nodded, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. She wasn't alone in this process. She didn't have to do it all at once. She could take her time. And most importantly, she could change. Over the next few weeks, Deborah continued to work through her emotions. She spent time reading, listening to different perspectives, and having difficult conversations with people around her. She began to understand that change wasn't just about recognizing her own flaws. It was about actively doing the work to change the way she thought and interacted with the world. Dr. Williams continued to visit, offering support and guidance, but never pushing her. He knew that true change couldn't be forced. It had to come from within. And slowly, Deborah began to find peace with her past, not by ignoring it, but by accepting it and choosing a better future. It wasn't easy. There were days when the old feelings resurfaced, when she felt overwhelmed by guilt or shame. But with every conversation, with every moment of reflection, Deborah felt herself moving forward, step by step, toward a new understanding of herself and the world around her. She would never be perfect. She would never be able to undo all the harm she had caused. But she was willing to try. She was willing to change. And that, in itself, was a victory. Deborah was no longer the person she had been before the accident. The shift had been slow, almost imperceptible at times, but it was happening. It was like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders, and for the first time in years, she felt lighter. Yet despite the progress she had made, there was still so much work to be done. Every day felt like a new challenge, a new opportunity to grow, and that was both empowering and exhausting. She had come to accept that the journey would be long. There was no quick fix for years of prejudice and deeply ingrained beliefs. But as each day passed, she realized that the process wasn't just about changing her views on others. It was about changing her view of herself. It had been 2 months since the accident, and Deborah had made significant strides. She was still in therapy, still working through the tangled emotions she had tried to suppress for so long. But something had shifted inside her. She no longer saw Dr. Williams as the man who had saved her. He was someone who had shown her a new way to look at the world, and for that, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. Deborah had started to look at people differently. She no longer judged them based on their appearance, their race, or their background. She had become more mindful of her words and actions, understanding how much power they had. She realized that her previous beliefs had not only been unfair to others, but also to herself. She had spent so much time living in a world defined by limitations that she had never truly allowed herself to experience the richness of human connection. But that wasn't to say the road was without its bumps. There were still moments when the old prejudices would flare up, when she would catch herself thinking in ways that felt familiar but wrong. In those moments, she would pause, take a breath, and remind herself that change wasn't linear. It wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. One afternoon, Deborah was sitting in the hospital garden, enjoying the quiet and the fresh air. The sun was shining brightly, casting long shadows across the lawn. She had been discharged a few weeks ago, but had come back to visit Dr. Williams and the team. She hadn't expected to stay long, but there was something comforting about being in the hospital, a place where so much had changed for her. As she sat there lost in thought, Dr. Williams appeared, walking toward her with a warm smile on his face. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, his voice calm but cheerful. "I didn't expect to see you here today. How are you doing?" Deborah smiled, standing up to greet him. "I'm doing well," she said, her voice genuine. "I wanted to come by and thank you. For everything. For being patient with me." Dr. Williams nodded, his smile widening. "You don't have to thank me, Deborah. You've done the hard work yourself. I'm just here to support you along the way." She couldn't help but laugh softly. "You make it sound easy, but it's been far from it." Dr. Williams chuckled in return. "Change never is, but you've made remarkable progress. It's been a privilege to watch you grow." Deborah's smile faded slightly as she looked out at the garden. "I still feel like I have so far to go. Sometimes it feels like no matter how much I change, I'll never be able to make up for the things I've done, the things I've believed." Dr. Williams sat beside her on the bench, his presence comforting but also giving her the space to speak freely. "It's natural to feel that way," he said quietly. "But you have to remember that the past doesn't define who you are today or who you'll be tomorrow. What matters is what you do from here on out. Every small change you make is a victory." Deborah nodded, but the doubt lingered in her chest. She had made progress, but the guilt was hard to shake. "I still feel like I've caused so much harm. I still think about the things I said, the things I believed. I can't take any of it back." "You can't," Dr. Williams agreed, his voice steady. "But you can choose to do better now. You can choose to use your experiences to help others understand, and that's where the real change happens." Deborah looked at him, her eyes searching his face for answers. "But how do I help others understand? How do I undo the harm I've caused?" "It's not about undoing it," Dr. Williams said gently. "It's about acknowledging it, taking responsibility for it, and then using your story to change the way others see things. It's about being honest about your past, and letting that honesty guide you forward." She thought about his words, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of clarity. She had been so focused on the past, on what she had done wrong, that she had forgotten that the future was in her hands. She couldn't change what had happened, but she could change what happened next. Deborah took a deep breath, letting the weight of that realization settle in her chest. I've been so caught up in my own shame that I never stopped to think about how I could use this to help others. I think I'm starting to understand what you mean. Dr. Williams smiled, proud of her progress. It's a big realization, and it's a powerful one. You've come a long way, Deborah, but the journey isn't over. There will be more challenges ahead, more moments of doubt. But you're stronger than you realize. Deborah smiled back, a small but genuine smile. For the first time, she felt like she was beginning to embrace her journey, not just as a process of change, but as a process of growth. As the conversation continued, Dr. Williams shared some advice on how to stay grounded during times of uncertainty. He encouraged her to keep doing the work, to keep seeking out opportunities for growth, and to remember that change took time. But most importantly, he reminded her to be kind to herself. When it was time for Deborah to leave, she stood up, feeling a sense of peace that she hadn't had before. She wasn't perfect, but she was moving in the right direction. And that was enough. I'll keep working on it, she said, her voice steady. And I'll keep listening. That's all you can do, Dr. Williams replied. Just keep moving forward. As Deborah walked out of the hospital, she couldn't help but feel a sense of hope for the first time in a long time. There would be more challenges, more moments of doubt, but she was ready for them. She knew now that change wasn't just about making amends. It was about continuing to grow, continuing to learn, and continuing to make a difference. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Deborah was no longer afraid to walk it. Deborah sat in the park, the cool breeze brushing through the trees, her mind still heavy with thoughts of the past few months. The days had blurred together, each one feeling like a mix of progress and uncertainty. She had come so far from the woman she had been, but in some ways the journey had only just begun. For so long she had lived with a sense of superiority, believing that her way of thinking was the only way. But the accident had shattered that illusion, forcing her to see the world in a completely different light. Every day felt like a challenge, not just physically but emotionally and mentally, but through it all, she had come to realize that she didn't have to do it alone. The support from Dr. Williams had been a steady source of strength for her. He had never judged her, never made her feel like she wasn't worth the effort. He had simply shown up day after day ready to help her get better, and in many ways that was what had changed her more than anything else. His patience, his kindness, his willingness to treat her with respect, despite everything she had done and said, had opened her eyes to what it meant to truly heal. Deborah had slowly begun to rebuild her relationships with the people around her. She had reached out to friends she had distanced herself from, apologizing for her past actions, acknowledging the hurt she had caused. It wasn't easy, and some of them didn't want to hear it, but that didn't stop her. She knew that the only way forward was to own her mistakes, no matter how uncomfortable it was. Today, she had decided to take a break from the therapy and the self-reflection. She needed some time to just be still, to let everything she had learned sink in. The park was quiet, the only sounds being the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves in the wind. It felt peaceful, like a moment of respite before the next wave of change. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She pulled it out and saw a message from Dr. Williams. "Hey Deborah, how are you feeling today? Thought I'd check in. Hope you're doing well." She smiled at the message, feeling a warmth in her chest. It had been a while since they'd had one of their long conversations, and she had come to look forward to them. She typed a quick response. "I'm doing better, just needed some time to reflect. Thanks for checking in." The response came almost immediately. "Glad to hear it. Remember, I'm here if you ever want to talk." Deborah put her phone away and leaned back against the bench, looking up at the sky. It was a beautiful day, and for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace with herself. It wasn't that everything was perfect or that all the pain had disappeared. It was just that for the first time, she felt like she was heading in the right direction. She had started volunteering at a local community center a few weeks ago. It was part of her journey to make amends, to contribute to something greater than herself. At first, she had been nervous, unsure of how people would react to her presence, especially given her past. But to her surprise, the experience had been transformative. She worked with people from all walks of life, people she had once dismissed or judged. And in doing so, she realized how much she still had to learn, how much she could give. The first time she had walked into the center, she had been apprehensive. She had expected judgment, but instead she was met with warmth and acceptance. The people there had no idea of her past, and for the first time she was able to interact with others without the weight of her previous biases hanging over her. It felt freeing, like she was no longer trapped by the beliefs she had once held. Deborah had learned so much from the people she met at the center. She had heard their stories, listened to their struggles, and realized how much she had taken for granted. She had started to understand that her journey wasn't just about unlearning her own prejudices. It was about becoming an ally, about using her privilege to help those who needed it most. The next day, she was back at the center, working with a group of teenagers on a community project. As she walked around, helping them with their tasks, she couldn't help but think about how far she had come. These kids had no idea who she had been, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that she was there, trying to make a difference, trying to be the person she had never been before. One of the teens, a young girl named Lucy, approached her as they worked. Deborah smiled at her and asked how the project was going. "It's going good, I think," Lucy said, her voice shy but full of enthusiasm. "I mean, I'm not the best at painting, but I'm trying." Deborah laughed softly. "You're doing great. It's all about trying." The conversation shifted to something deeper as Lucy began to open up about her life. She spoke of her struggles at school, of the challenges she faced as a young black girl trying to navigate a world that often seemed set against her. Deborah listened intently, realizing how little she had understood about the experiences of others, especially those who had been marginalized. "I don't really get why people have to judge other people just based on how they look," Lucy said, her brow furrowed. "It doesn't make sense to me. I mean, why can't people just be kind?" Deborah was struck by the simplicity and truth of Lucy's words. She had spent so much of her life judging others, believing in stereotypes, and failing to recognize the humanity in people who were different from her. And now, here was this young girl teaching her a lesson she had never fully grasped. "You're absolutely right," Deborah said quietly, her voice filled with sincerity. "It doesn't make sense. People should just be kind to each other no matter what." Lucy smiled, clearly pleased by Deborah's response. "I think you get it," she said, her eyes bright with hope. "I think you're doing a good job." Deborah smiled back, feeling a deep sense of pride. It wasn't just about the work she was doing at the center. It was about the connections she was making, the lessons she was learning, and the person she was becoming. As the days went by, Deborah found herself reflecting more and more on the path she had taken. The road hadn't been easy, and it wasn't over yet. But she no longer felt the weight of her past bearing down on her. She had learned to forgive herself, to accept that she couldn't change the things she had done or said in the past, but she could change how she lived today, and that was what mattered most. The next time she saw Dr. Williams, they had a long conversation about her progress. He was proud of the work she had been doing, but he also reminded her that change was a continuous process. There would always be more to learn, more ways to grow, and more opportunities to do better. "I think I'm finally starting to understand what you meant when you said that the journey doesn't end," Deborah said, her voice steady with realization. "It's not about being perfect. It's about doing the work every day, even when it's hard." Dr. Williams nodded, his expression calm but knowing. "Exactly. And you're doing it. Every day you're taking steps forward." Deborah smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt before. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time she didn't feel afraid to walk it.